Good morning. Today we're going to cover two thwart counters. In Cheney's book, he only includes one of the counters in his translation, but the one he doesn't include, the one that's given earlier in Ringeck, is actually my favorite, so I threw it on a post-it note and I'm going to include it as well. Both of these are counters from somebody cutting around to kind of that second thwart. So if you remember from last week, we have where we thwarted and then we did the knock and thwart to the other side. This is a counter to two versions of that. One is to a high target, one is to a low target. So I'll read to you both and then I'll show you how to practice them on the bell. So when you bind on him from the right with an overhew, if he then strikes around with the thwart to the other side, so come forward as well with the thwart under his sword on his neck, such that he strikes himself the same with your sword. So that's a counter against the high thwart that they're coming around. And then against the lower thwart, when you bind to his sword from your right side, if he then strikes around from the sword with the lateral to the other opening of your right side, remain with your cross guard over your head and turn your sword's blade downward against his hew and stab him to the lower opening as pictured. So the cross above the head is really key for both of them. So for the first counter, we've cut and the person's either countered with an overcut or probably a thwart cut on this side and it didn't land. We had this high bind, they're going to come around. The first one, we're just throwing a kind of a tight angle thwart to get under their sword. So as their sword is coming around, I'm going to let my pommel hand rise. I'm going to be throwing pretty tight along my shoulder to get a tighter angle to cut into their neck under their cut, and their thwart cut should end up on top. So it's a pretty quick 1-2 kind of a motion. Because this is a counter off of somebody going really fast, I don't think you have time to do a lot of footwork on this one. So when I practice this one on the pel, I'll come in and strike, and then I'll just, from this side, throwing a back edge cut to that side, and it's really a rising cut because I want to get as tight along my shoulder as I can. If I go wide, they're going to hit me in the arm or the head first because they're already on their way. So this 1-2 is very important. The high cross guard is important. If I do this, I'm going to get smashed in the fingers. So 1-2. And the loose hands are really important. If you death grip this, you're not going to get a tight enough angle. It's going to be slow. They're going to get under. They're going to hit you. So the counter to somebody doing a cut around with the second thwart to our right side from this high bind is just thwarting underneath. If they go for the low target, and I find this one tends to happen a little further out, what we're going to do is, again, we're going to not have a lot of time for footwork. So for me, this is just facilitated by the turn of the hips. I'm going to cut across, still with high hands. So from here, I'm now bringing my true edge across my body so that because they're kind of throwing a body thwart, and that gets my point in line to throw a low line thrust. So for this one, I'll still hit, and then from this fairly tight range, I'm going to turn my body facing the pel so that it's almost a hanging guard position, really, and then I can just step in and thrust. So those are the two counters that you see against this thwarting around. It's better when we do the thwarting around to our opponent, but sometimes it happens. So just to reiterate on the pel, 1-2 versus the high, or 1-2 thrust versus the low. So just remember, from here, don't rear back. If we pull back like this, we're going to get hit. We don't have the time. So the loose lead hand, lifting with the pommel hand to get this nice tight rising thwart into their neck is very important. Not pulling back with the shoulders. Or same thing here, it's really about the pommel hand and a loose lead hand. We don't have time to pull back and around. So it's really important to be keyed in on the pommel facilitating the movement so that we can get this quickly. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of cut the corner, person's thwarting around either high or low, and we're trying to get there first, which means we need to take a more inside line. So the nice thing is, if this is a tough motion for you, either one of these, and they are a little awkward, that means it's a good motion to practice in general, so you have this kind of physical pattern in your toolbox. So. If you don't turn the center, if you just do this, you're gonna feel super awkward and weak. They might blow through and hit you anyway. Make sure you're turning the center and making the pommel do the work. Again, my lead hand's not driving this very much. And with both of these, just make sure you have high hands so they get out of the way. So I think these are really cool. That little under thwart, I use it all the time in sparring, whether the opponent's trying to thwart around or just throw kind of a standard 1-2. It's one of my go-tos. It's awesome. It lands all the time, and even if it doesn't land, you're in a nice, safe position. And then again, if somebody's kind of thwarting to a low line attack, especially from further out, that cross and thrust gives you a really nice controlled position, which again, even if the thrust doesn't land, you're in a good spot. Play with those, and we'll work on some new stuff next week.